When financial news reports mention the terms recession and depression, it's common for the general public to feel confused or even alarmed. While both refer to significant downturns in economic activity, the scale, causes, duration, and effects of each are vastly different. A recession is a relatively common occurrence in the economic cycle, while a depression is a rare and severe economic event that reshapes entire nations and generations. Yet, the subtle but impactful differences between them are often misunderstood. This video uncovers 10 key, often overlooked distinctions that go beyond basic definitions, helping you better understand economic trends and protect your financial well-being. 1. Duration. Months versus years. One of the most distinguishing yet often overlooked differences between a recession and a depression is the length of time they last. A recession typically endures for a few months up to a couple of years at most, with economic recovery beginning relatively soon. In contrast, a depression spans several years, sometimes an entire decade. The Great Depression, for instance, lasted from 1929 to 1939 in various global economies. Recessions are considered temporary economic contractions, while depressions are prolonged periods of stagnation and struggle, often marked by multiple recessionary cycles within them. 2. Depth of economic contraction. While both involve a decline in GDP, a depression is significantly deeper. In a typical recession, the GDP might contract by a few percentage points, enough to cause concern but not panic. In a depression, however, GDP can plummet by double digits. During the Great Depression, for example, US GDP dropped by more than 30%. This sheer depth of contraction leads to more severe job losses, bankruptcies, and a widespread collapse of consumer and investor confidence, creating long-term effects on the economy's structural health. 3. Psychological impact on society. Recessions create anxiety and financial stress, but depressions reshape entire generations' attitudes toward money, work, and savings. During a recession, consumer behavior is cautious, yet hopeful. In a depression, fear dominates, often leading to a complete shift in societal values. The Depression era birthed the "save everything" mentality among older generations, and it permanently altered career choices, family dynamics, and risk tolerance. These psychological scars persist long after the economy recovers and often influence financial behavior for decades. 4. Policy response and government intervention. Recessions usually trigger targeted policy responses like lowering interest rates, tax cuts, and stimulus packages. Governments and central banks often succeed in cushioning the blow or shortening the downturn. However, during a depression, these conventional tools may fail or be insufficient, requiring more drastic interventions such as sweeping regulatory changes, massive public works programs, or overhauls of monetary systems. The New Deal during the Great Depression is a prime example of how governments shift from reactive to transformative policies during a depression. 5. Global versus national impact. Recessions can be localized or global, depending on the cause, but many are restricted to a single country or region. A depression, by contrast, almost always has global implications. The interconnectivity of global trade and finance means that a true depression affects multiple nations simultaneously. The Great Depression started in the US but quickly spread to Europe, Latin America, and Asia, resulting in a worldwide collapse of economic activity and political upheaval. Depressions reshape global institutions, trade relationships, and international policy. 6. Unemployment levels and job recovery. During a recession, unemployment rises, often sharply, but jobs typically return as the economy rebounds. Unemployment in a recession may peak around 6 to 10%, depending on the severity. In a depression, unemployment rates can exceed 20 to 25%, with millions losing jobs for prolonged periods. The job recovery during a depression is often slow and uneven, with entire industries failing to bounce back. Moreover, underemployment and workforce exits, people giving up on job searching altogether, become more pronounced in a depression, amplifying its social impact. 7. Business failures and bank collapses. While a recession causes stress for businesses, most firms manage to weather the storm with cost-cutting and reduced operations. In a depression, massive waves of bankruptcies occur, including large corporations, small businesses, and entire sectors. More critically, a depression often results in widespread bank failures, evaporating savings and crushing consumer trust. For example, over 9,000 banks failed during the U.S. Great Depression. This destruction of financial infrastructure differentiates a depression from a typical recession where central banks now work aggressively to prevent systemic collapse. 8. Asset value collapse and wealth destruction. Recessions commonly lead to declines in stock prices and real estate values, but these tend to recover once the economy stabilizes. In a depression, asset values crash and remain depressed for years, causing long-lasting wealth destruction. Investors, homeowners, and retirees can lose decades of accumulated wealth, often without recovery. This prolonged devaluation affects intergenerational wealth transfer, retirement planning, and the ability to rebuild capital. The psychological effect of watching one's assets wither for years also discourages risk-taking and investing. 9. Deflation versus inflation pressures. While recessions are often accompanied by disinflation or mild deflation, depressions frequently result in sustained deflation. In a depression, prices of goods and services fall steadily due to collapsing demand, which sounds beneficial but is actually harmful. Deflation increases the real burden of debt, reduces business profits, and causes consumers to delay purchases in anticipation of lower prices, which further stalls economic growth. Central banks often struggle to reverse this deflationary spiral, making economic recovery extremely difficult. 10. Frequency and historical rarity. Recessions occur relatively frequently as part of the natural business cycle. Most modern economies experience a recession every 6 to 10 years. While unpleasant, they're expected and somewhat predictable. Depressions, on the other hand, are extremely rare. In U.S. history, there has been only one widely agreed upon depression, the Great Depression of the 1930s. This rarity makes depressions harder to prepare for or predict, and because they happen so infrequently, many financial systems and institutions are untested in true depression conditions. Understanding the nuanced differences between a recession and a depression is more than academic. It's essential for anyone trying to navigate the economic cycles that influence everything from job security to investment returns. While both represent downturns, a depression is far more severe in depth, duration, and societal impact. Knowing how these events unfold differently empowers individuals, investors, and policymakers to make informed decisions in times of uncertainty. Recognizing the signs, responding with appropriate strategy, and maintaining historical perspective are key steps to weathering economic storms. In an age of global connectivity and financial volatility, separating these terms clearly can make the difference between reacting in fear or acting with foresight.